Keir Starmer promised the delegates in his summit today that he will cut red tape to make it easier for them to do business here. Well, there's one very, very easy way for him to cut red tape, and that's to get rid of his Brexit red lines and get back in the single market and customs union. We are absolutely drowning in Brexit red tape. It's strangling businesses.
But today we're pursuing a different ambition, a shared ambition. Growth.
I think the difference in the UK is, on your own now, separate from Europe, it's a relatively small market for most multinationals and certainly for Americans. So something needs to be quite different to make it interesting.
Can the difference be made up? You talk about us being a smaller market now. Can we persuade you to make the kind of investments you might have made if we were part of a bigger market?
Well, I think so. If we had in a hypothetical world, a market of this size that really encouraged innovation, not just in investment, but in utilization, right? So that the system was set up to really take advantage of the breakthroughs in biomedical innovation, put them to work in the real world, study those effects so that globally that knowledge could be shared and really become kind of an incubator for access to these medications as well as utilization. That would be quite interesting because then we could point to such a market and say, look here, they get the picture. Not only do they want our inward investment, which every country wants, but they put their money where their mouth is and deliver both a high growth environment for the industry, but also one that is a health system built around the idea that next generation technology can make a better world for its people. And I think that's a promise to continue to pursue. And this announcement today is a step in that direction.
Keir Starmer's business summit has gone reasonably well, given the absolute disasters of other events that have dogged his premiership in the last 100 days. However, there is a problem for Keir Starmer because Brexit is still very much the elephant in the room and people are walking around it. And you have to wonder why any international investor would want to come and invest in producing products in Britain because they're not going to find it very easy to export those products to the continent that we are actually part of. The whole reason why international investors favoured Britain was because of our ability to have access to the single market. It gave them a foot in the door to export their products straight into the EU. And Keir Starmer has made that very difficult by strapping himself around these ludicrous red lines, which actually Theresa May invented to keep the Eurosceptics happy in the Conservative Party. We still don't know why Keir Starmer is still nursing these ludicrous red lines, which in fact have been a misinterpretation of the Brexit referendum, which only asked if people wanted to be in or out, didn't mention anything about red lines around the single market and customs union. Former donor of the Conservative Party, John Caldwell, who founded Phones for EU, has now switched allegiances to the Labour Party, and he has been out doing the media rounds for the Labour government and singing their praises. He was exasperated by the Conservative Party.
So John Caldwell, he has supported the Conservatives for 51 years and now has switched to Labour.
And says he'll have some degree of influence in the policies they pursue when they get into government. He doesn't rule out giving them some money at some stage later down the line.
There's two issues that affect every man, woman and child in this country. One is GDP growth, because that's the way you get the services. And the second one is climate change. And unless they put these world issues at the forefront of their policy, dabbling about with other things. I've been quoted many times that it's like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
And John Caldwell also backed Brexit.
I absolutely want Brexit out of the way. Then I would go for Boris and committing to this deadline, deal or no deal, of being out by October the 31st, because the very worst thing for the whole of society, whether it's huge corporate enterprises, smaller businesses, or the general public is uncertainty.
Right.
Uncertainty kills.
So you're not scared of a no-deal Brexit?
I would much prefer a deal, but we should have done a no deal or a deal 2 years ago. It's ridiculous the way this can has been kicked down the road for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, but that's because it was undeliverable. That's why it's been kicked down the road.
No, it's not undeliverable.
If you read into it, a no-deal Brexit
it's
is
not
just
undeliverable.
ridiculous.
It's
There's nobody in business backs a no-deal
That's not
Brexit.
true. That is so not true.
No.
Okay,
Listen, I wouldn't care about
Terry talk for a second.
Okay, I wouldn't mind a no-deal Brexit if it was worth $1.5 billion, like John. But the reality is here, it's a wrong premise. The question, do you trust Boris Johnson to deliver Brexit? It's like, do you trust the captain of the Titanic to crash into the iceberg? It's undeliverable.
And yesterday there was an interview published in The Independent with him. And it was interesting in that he can easily blame politicians for the failure of Brexit. But he can't actually admit that Brexit is and always was going to be a failure. He wants to maintain a position which is that we have missed out on the opportunities of Brexit, which is the most ludicrous thing it's not the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard recently, but it's one of the most ludicrous things I've ever heard. A successful businessman to not look at the facts around, particularly with products. He was in the technology of phones, which is absolutely reliant upon trade. And he thinks that Brexit had opportunities. I mean, what for? What opportunities exactly? The very many negatives of Brexit are so enormous now. Our goods trade is really damaged. Our exports are down by 17% to the EU. Our imports are down by 23%. And that is only going to get worse, particularly if they do ever get around to putting in the rest of the checks for imports coming into Britain. And so where is the advantage of Brexit? And why would you, as an international investor, put money into Britain? One academic who was highly critical of Brexit, who was born in Britain, but now is over in America, in Massachusetts University. He's just been awarded the Nobel Prize, and he has been highly critical of Brexit.
Billionaire businessman John Caldwell liked the Conservatives enough to give them £500,000 for the 2019 general election campaign. But he's told The Times he switched to Labour in despair. So we can speak to John Caldwell now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, mate.
Why are you in despair?
Oh, dear.
The short version, John.
I really need to explain that. I think there's so many mistakes been made during Richie's chancellorship and carrying on through his prime ministerial duties. But if you just look at one basic statistic, which is that although there's been a headwind against the UK economy and in many regards that the Tories couldn't avoid, the country is no better off now than it was in 2007. That's a long, long time to get no GDP growth. And we need new thinking and new policies to be employed. And when I've looked at the Labour manifesto, there's a huge crossover between their manifesto and my beliefs. So if they're able to implement one fraction of that, then I will be very pleased that I supported Labour and we'll be on the right pathway. Well, and meanwhile, what's to support in the Tory party? They really have been falling to bits now for 5 years. And of course, almost impossible for them to regain power either.
Okay, so this is still a leap of faith for you in a way, isn't it? Because obviously 51 years supporting the Conservatives, you're jumping ship now, and I've just got a quote here from you. Their manifesto is grow GDP, create wealth, and use that wealth to help the poorer members of society. I mean, that's just written on paper, and you believe that. How specifically will they grow the economy, grow GDP?
Well, there's a lot of measures that they've already got in the manifesto that they're already looking to implement. Deregulation, cutting public spending, improving the planning laws, making us self-sufficient in energy. There's a whole huge raft, way too much to go into detail here. But I don't know how successful they'll be implementing, because one thing saying you're going to do something, it's another thing doing it. At least if you say you're doing the things that are the right things, that is a supportable argument. And then what we have to do is make darn sure that we do it. And I'm hoping that I can have some degree of influence in the Labour Party to put them on certain correct pathways if I believe they're not on the correct commercial pathway. And I've got lots of ideas of how that might be to grow Britain's science and technology and environmental businesses within the UK by inward investment. And if they do even a small amount of what I'm going to recommend to them, then Britain will look a different country in 4 or 5 years from an energy point of view and from an inward investment point of view.
If you're happy with what they're doing, will you donate money to Labour?
Well, if I'm happy with what they're doing, they probably won't need me to or want me to. But
if they want you to, will you?
Well, it's a possibility. You know, if I'm very happy with what they're doing and they're under threat in the next election, I would look. The best answer to this, I will support any party that will put the great back into Britain. And if the great is going back into Britain and somebody needs my support, then I'm here to give it.
You talked about you've got lots of plans to help Labour grow the economy. One of the statistics that we find really stark, I think it's 1 in 5 people are economically inactive. And some of that is down to sickness, long-term sickness. But 1 in 5 economically inactive. This can be for lots of different reasons, but that's a big problem. Some of that is to do with the pandemic. How would you get that? How would you change that figure? How would you get more people to actually work?
Well, that isn't my area of expertise, of course, but I think we do need to tackle this issue of mental health. And I've looked at this a lot because of my involvement with Lyme disease, PANS pandas. These are physical illnesses that cause mental illnesses. And we do need to improve the health service dramatically, but that can only be done partly as a result of investing more money, but partly maybe radically looking at the way we do things. Let me give you one example. I set up a charity called Cordwell Youth, and Cordwell Youth puts a one-on-one mentor, every person that's between 11 and 24 that is deemed to be at risk of mental health problems, of criminality, of drug abuse, of addictions, of sexual exploitation, etc. And that is reducing the problems within those young people dramatically. We have an amazing success rate, and it costs me personally £5,000 per year per young person. But what an amazing investment that is when it stops that young person potentially going into jail, into prison, and costing the state £500,000 a year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, and John, that's part of it. But just finally, the other part of the economically inactive, some of it is I think it's people over 50 who, after the pandemic, decided that they didn't want to go back to work for whatever reason. Do you think they're selfish?
No. I mean, that's somebody's personal choice. But we need to look at the.
Well, it has an economic impact, doesn't it?
Yeah, let me finish. If somebody's going to not want to go back to work, and it's their choice not to go back.
60 years deep in the North Sea. My story begins, a story of powering forward.
To work, then it ought to be the state's choice not to give them any unemployment benefit and to be maybe harder on the rules regarding social service. Social service is there for those people that really cannot go to work, that have really got huge problems, like the people supporting Cordwell children, disabled parents of disabled children.
Right.
We need to do more for the oppressed people of society, and we need to encourage those people who can go to work to make sure they go to work, or to take away some of their benefits.
And John, very quickly, you don't support Labour on VAT on private schools?
No, I don't. No, it's. I think it's look, whether it ends up being commercially positive in the long term for the Exchequer, I don't know, but I think there's an argument that it might be make the exchequer worse off in the long term, not better off, and meanwhile put a huge extra pressure on state schools. I don't think it's something we need to do. I don't think it's desirable. And I think there's many more policies that are so much more important than putting VAT on private schools.
Okay, John, thank you. That is John Caldwell.
Commercially positive in the long term for the exchequer, I don't know. But I think there's an argument that it might be make the exchequer worse off in the long term, not better off, and meanwhile put a huge extra pressure on state schools. I don't think it's something we need to do. I don't think it's desirable. And I think there's many more policies that are so much more important than putting VAT on private schools.
It is only really, particularly in Britain, but possibly only in England, because Scotland is honest about Brexit. The rest of the world is looking on us and either laughing at us or pitying us for Brexit. And on it goes. And I wish I'd been a fly on the wall in that summit today to know what investors were saying.